Welcome to Wisdom for Nonprofits, bringing the best business wisdom to the nonprofit world. Proven leaders share their experience, insights, and best practices. Finally, a podcast for the busy nonprofit professional. And now, your trusted advisor, Bettina Meyer-Flug.
I've been training several nonprofits on team building lately, and I'm always amazed at the sector's general fear of nonprofit strategic planning. I get it. Strategic planning has traditionally been done so badly that many have just given up on the idea altogether. But that's a mistake. Without a long-term strategy for what your nonprofit is trying to accomplish and how you will marshal people and money to reach it, you are just spinning your wheels. Rather than being feared, I would like to invite you to see in a different perspective. Strategic planning can actually be easily done if you have the right person doing the right questions side by side with you. I invited here today to be with us Carol Hamilton. She's a consultant who helps nonprofits become more strategic and innovative for greater mission impact. She facilitates strategic planning and helps organizations prepare for executive transitions. Carol has more than 25 years of experience in the nonprofit and association sector, working with organizations with a range of missions. Carol trains frequently on leadership, strategy, organization culture, and design, as well as innovation topics. She graduated from Smartmore College and has her master's in organization development. As a strategic thinker, Carol works with teams and organizations to envision and frame the future strategy direction. Practical in her approach, she helps organizations think through who is the key to creating the future, how to gather insights from these stakeholders, consider the big picture, imagine new possibilities, come to an agreement on the future goals, and create an initial action plan to get started. Welcome, Carol, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Wow, 25 years of experience. Can you share with us your career path into this amazing nonprofit world, Carol?
Yeah, and I'll try not to have it take 25 years for me to recount that. So, yeah, I started out right after college. I worked for a small business that published a magazine that actually helped people get on talk shows. So when I was interviewing someone for my podcast, they said, "Look, you've come full circle. You do your own talk show now." So I'm like, yes, that's true. But at that place, we took all comers, like any for-profit. We were open to any clients and any perspectives that they were sharing in the world. And I realized that I found that I was quite good at that work. And but when I moved back to Washington, D.C., my home, I decided that I really wanted to shift gears and support causes and perspectives that I really believed in. And so that's when I took my first step into the nonprofit sector. So over the course of my career, I've worked for a variety of different organizations, coalitions working on children, youth, and family issues, associations, education. The very last organization that I worked inside was a capacity builder for environmental organizations. So over the course of my career, I really got started out doing really marketing and communications for the groups that I was working for. And then over time, just became more and more interested in how people did the work that they were doing, what motivated them. And then also was motivated by the gap that I saw often between the aspiration that the organization had, the mission that it had for change in the wider world, and then a misalignment of that and its culture. So got much more interested in kind of that internal piece, and that's what led me to organization effectiveness work and working with organizations.
That's incredible. And what is, in your opinion, that's generating this fear of the nonprofit professionals to face and create a strategic planning?
Well, I think, as you said, I think a lot of times what I hear from folks is they've been through a process that was long and involved, and it really didn't get them the results that they wanted. They ended up with a very complicated plan that was left on a shelf. And so then then they think, well, that was a lot of time and energy. We've got a lot of other things we could be spending time on. Why do that again? And so I feel like I have to woo people back to, it doesn't have to be an arduous and painful process. We can have some fun along the way, and then you can also come out with a product that's going to be really, relatively high level, pretty simple. My mantra pretty much in all things is keep it simple, and you know what the last one stands for, really actionable.
That's good. And how often they should do a strategic planning? Depends on the size of the nonprofit. If it's a big organization, it's different than for a small and medium size.
No, I don't think the timing necessarily matters in terms of size. Generally, when I'm working with clients, they're working on a plan that's anywhere from 3 to 5 years. And oftentimes they'll do a plan for 3 years, and then maybe, different things get in the way, and it takes them a little bit longer to do, what they were aiming for. So they then stretch it out to a 5-year plan. Trying to plan, much beyond that is challenging in this environment of so much change. But when I'm working with organizations, I also work with them to create a tool that helps them also not only set their intentions for how they want to move forward, but then also have a tool for making decisions about all those unexpected things that inevitably pop up as soon as you've hit print on the plan, or as soon as the board has voted to accept it.
And how do you align the strategic planning with their vision and mission? Is this the first step that we take to approach the strategic planning? How do you approach preparing a strategic planning?
Yeah, I think traditionally revisiting mission and vision at the front end of a strategic planning process has been how folks have approached it, but I actually flip it and have them reconsider the mission and vision at the end of the process. Now that assumes that it's a mature organization, or an organization that's been around for a little while, already has a mission statement, already has a vision statement. But I find that coming to it at the end of the process, it gives the whole group of the benefit of all the conversations that they've had, about what's the current state of their organization, what are their aspirations, what's that wider ecosystem that they're working within, what are they aiming for in terms of 3 to 5 kind of big goals, and then to have all of that be fresh in everyone's mind to then say, okay, this is our mission statement. We haven't looked at it for 5 years. Let's look at it and see, is there anything that we want to change or update given all of those conversations that we just had? And then, differentiating a mission statement for what's the purpose of the organization, and the vision statement of really what's the change that you're trying to see in the world, and taking a look at those in light of all the conversations that you've just had through the strategic planning process. And I find that when you do it that way, it just goes much quicker, and people can kind of jump into the conversation. Doing it at the front end, I feel like kind of kills the momentum.
Yes, I agree with you. And also, I know that we learn a lot by our mistakes. How often do you compare a previous strategic planning to what you want to do right now? Do you use this as a reference, or what were the mistakes we made the past 2-3 years, and how can we do it differently? Is this part of the process as well?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things as part of the process is to, once you're done with the kind of big push in terms of the plan, and you've got a plan solidified, that you also agree on how you're going to keep track of things. How are you, how often are you checking in with this? Are you creating a dashboard to kind of track your progress? But then also, to not be shy about making tweaks to the plan, maybe 6 months down the line, a year down the line, 2 years down the line. things may shift. We certainly know how the world can turn on a dime in the last couple years. So balance that, being willing to make changes, that this was a plan made by a group of people that can be changed. It's not, tablets from on high. And then balancing that with not shifting direction every 6 months so that people are just completely confused and you're never making any progress because you're always shifting direction. So it's kind of a balancing act between the two. But I think the main thing is to make sure that as soon as you are kind of finished with the process, knowing that you're not finished with the process, that in 6 months, at the end of a quarter, at 6 months, at a year, you're going to take some time. You're going to spend some time at a meeting, at a board meeting, checking in and asking a couple different questions about, what have we made progress on? What haven't we? What have we learned since we did the plan? What might need to be changed? What might we need to let go of? So asking those questions on a regular cadence will help keep that plan useful and up to date and relevant.
Perfect. Thank you, Carol. And I would like to know I don't think we do have an ideal way of creating a strategic planning. I mean, the format, because after COVID, a lot of people start working remotely. But can you share your experience about doing it in person, remotely, or hybrid? How can you deal with those different scenarios to create an engagement strategic planning meeting, for example?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times folks really focus in on what used to always be a kind of 1 day or 1.5 day retreat. There's a lot of work that happens before that, and then when we've moved online, I've been kind of able to deconstruct that retreat and do it in a series of shorter meetings, 90 minutes, 2 hours, 3 hours, depending on the group, usually with probably a week in between. And I've actually found a lot of benefits to doing it online, in that not having that kind of marathon where you're just there all day, and by the time you actually need to make decisions, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon and everyone is just fried. And so parsing it out and kind of deconstructing the planning process enables people to think in between, kind of metabolize the thoughts, the possible changes, all those things. And then in front of in front of any kind of event, you're needing to do all of that input process where you're talking to people, doing interviews, focus groups, probably a survey, some combination of those things to really get a sense of how are people seeing the organization? What are people seeing as the strengths and opportunities? What are people aspiring to in the future? So being able to come to that first meeting with a synthesis of that, so that people can really start with a shared understanding of how people are seeing the organization, really helps launch a useful conversation.
That's perfect. And what is the ideal timing during the year to do a strategic planning? I'm asking you this because, as you know, I'm from Brazil, and the school year starts in January and ends in December. Here in the United States, we start in August, and then we go until May, June the next year. For nonprofits, and considering fundraising, considering all the donation levels that we have, depending on the period of the year, and a lot of fundraising events they organize, what is the ideal timing to start preparing, and how long it lasts, the strategic planning preparation?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I don't know that there is an ideal time. What I've observed is that a lot of people do start a process at the beginning of the year. So that's often a busy time for people who do strategic planning. Another time is this point in the year where it's the fall, or kids are going back to school, and so it also feels like a time to do planning. But a lot of times it has to do with the individual organization's fiscal year, what their budget cycle is, and what fits with their program planning, when they're busiest, when they have time. And I think that's one of the really important things to consider, is to really think about readiness. Do you have sufficient bandwidth both from the staff and board to be able to properly engage in the process. And generally it takes about 6 months to go from start to finish, sometimes a little bit longer. And a lot of that has to do with, are you doing it online? Are you, breaking out those pieces, which can then extend it a little bit longer over time. But then also it's just scheduling. Folks are always calling and saying, we want to get started next week. And we're going to we want to get it done by the end of the year. And most of the time, given everything else that the organization has going on, that ends up being somewhat unrealistic. So being realistic about the pacing and how much engagement you can expect from all of your stakeholders is important.
And what is the format that you use? You have a template that you follow, some questions. What are the main questions you should ask for your team to be able to create a strategic planning?
Yeah, I mean, I start at the beginning with an organizational assessment, and that can, include, like I said, interviews, focus groups of different groups. That could be staff, board, external stakeholders of various sorts, funders, and the types of questions will be pretty big and open-ended, especially for those interview questions. Kind of what are your impressions of the organization? What do you see as its strengths? What are you most proud of in terms of accomplishments? What's getting in the way? What's keeping you up at night? How is the board functioning? How is the staff operating? Those kinds of questions. And then, it's 5 years from now, the organization is really thriving. What do you see in the future for the organization? So those are the kinds of kind of big picture questions that I'm asking. In a survey, sometimes we'll get into some more nitty gritty or some specifics when organizations are really wanting to focus equity. Sometimes we'll add in questions that are beyond just kind of impressions of the organization, but more how are people experiencing the organization from a sense of belonging and equity. And so those are the kinds of things that we're looking at, but it's basically kind of taking a big picture approach to think about where is the organization, where are those strengths, where are those, what needs attention, what are those opportunities, and what are people aspiring to.
That's great. And how important it is to have someone that has deeply knowledge in finances joining the strategic planning meetings. Is that important, necessary? What is your point of view?
I mean, I think that's always a really useful lens to bring to all of this, because the last thing that I want to leave any group with is a plan that's so ungrounded from their reality and from their current capacity that it just ends up on the shelf because it has no connection to what's actually going on in the organization. So, there's a kind of a push-pull between that vision and aspiration and stretch goals and what's really grounded in the current reality. How much, additional capacity does the organization have to take on anything new? What are the funding possibilities? So that operationalizing of the plan is a really important final step that goes along with that kind of tweaking and reevaluating that I talked about before.
Mm-hmm. And if we see the nonprofits with the lens of the pillars, we have the operation pillars, we have the fundraising, and we have the volunteer management. Is it important for everybody to be involved? What levels of employees would you invite to a strategic planning meeting, for example?
I mean, that is actually one where it is going to depend on the size of the organization. With the smaller the organization, a small organization, you would involve everyone. And then as organizations get bigger, you may think about how do you involve folks in different ways. So it may be inviting folks to answer a survey. It may be inviting folks to a listening session or a focus group, and then being clear about who's going to be part of that planning process. I am an advocate of involving more people on the front end than you might expect. I think a lot of groups get a little nervous about inviting a lot of people in, thinking that it's just going to be anarchy, too many opinions, too many, cross-cutting and differing perspectives. But through that process of talking to everyone, I really find that generally there's usually a lot more agreement than people are aware of. And so that whole process enables you to bring out that 80 to 90% that people are actually in agreement about. And then it's really the process then is having you talk about that last 10% of where we differ. And I think there are different ways that you can involve folks, and we can have up to 50 people involved in a planning process. It's really about how do you design that meeting and how do you synthesize everything that comes out of it, and then having a smaller group that can take the kind of big picture and lots of thoughts from the meeting and synthesize it down into, okay, here are the 3 things that we're hearing that are bubbling up that are most about that we really need to focus in on. So it's kind of tacking back and forth between the large group and the small group.
You seem like a very experienced facilitator, Kara. I'm very impressed. You know that ownership is one of the key points to have everybody involved once you want to implement a strategic planning. How do you tackle this of getting everybody involved, listen to their opinions, and making them feel the ownership of this plan?
And that's why I really advocate including more people than sometimes leaders are comfortable with, because when you don't, you get the opposite, right? You have a small group of people who get together, create a plan. It sounds lovely to them. They present it to everyone else, and then they wonder why everyone else isn't excited. Well, they're not excited because they weren't at the table to be part of the conversation. So how can you really front end and have a lot of people involved at the beginning, and then work with a smaller group to take that synthesis and be able to boil it down? So that's where a strategic planning committee often will do work at the very front end of the process of identifying who are all the stakeholders that we need to engage, and then at the back end of really taking all the information from those planning sessions, boiling it down to 3 to 5 goals, and identifying how we're going to get there.
Great. And what are the common mistakes the nonprofits do when preparing strategic planning?
Well, I think we talked about a couple, going too small, trying to have it be, okay, it's just going to be the strategic planning committee that comes up with a plan for everyone, and then wondering why folks aren't excited about it. I think in the past, plans have been very complicated. Folks have tried to nail down exactly what they were doing and exactly how they were going to measure progress 3 years from now. And to me, that's just unrealistic and kind of a waste of energy. So when I work with groups, I try to have them at the end of the process really just translate that implementation plan into year 1. What are we doing in year 1? We can worry about what we're doing in year 2. Really drilling down into the details at, just before year 2. So that's where we get back to that tweaking and monitoring progress. And so being able to have essentially kind of your bigger picture plan where you've got those big goals, you've got some action steps, you've got some success indicators, but then with that year 1 plan, you're then saying, okay, and Mary's going to work on that in the first quarter, and we're going to have a report at the board meeting, in July, whatever it might be. And that's where you're really operationalizing it. So those are a couple that I would say are, mistakes. Other ones where the pie in the sky, where it's really, just disconnected from the capacity of the organization. It's such a big and outlandish plan that it's just overwhelming to everybody because it's so unaligned with where the organization is at this moment. And then, so there are some organizations that go into strategic planning because someone else told them to do it. And I think if there's just one person on your board who's excited about it, or if a funder told you have to do it and you're doing it begrudgingly, to me, that's kind of a waste of everyone's energy because you're not really invested in the process.
Can you explain in details how is your process and what is the end goal by working with you? What is the document that they get it and how they can use this?
Yeah, so it's a multi-stage process. The first is, us getting to know each other better. What are folks hoping for from the strategic planning process? I'll ask them for a whole bunch of documents so I can get some background on the organization and get a sense of, what have they already done? So we're always building up with what they've already done rather than recreating the wheel. If they've done a member survey recently, how can we build on that and complement it rather than repeating it? Then that second phase of the discovery. Then the third phase is really those planning sessions. And again, that could be an in-person retreat. It could be a series of meetings online. And then the final phase is really finalizing the plan. And I like to have, you asked about what does the document actually look like? And try to not have it be more than 2 to 3 pages. I don't actually allow any of my clients to have more than 5 goals. I just don't. I think that's too much to try to take on, and that's the I think that's another mistake that a lot of nonprofits get trapped in, of just always trying to do too much. Obviously, the needs are always bigger than what the organization can usually really tackle. So how can you really focus? And if they end up with 7 things that they're excited about, I'll actually do a survey where I have people do a force ranking and say, okay, what is your number 1, 2, and 3? And so those big goals, and it needs to start with a verb. I guess this comes from maybe my where I started out in communications. You can't have a plan for action without an action verb. So that's one of the things you need. So it can't just be communication. It needs to be something about communication. What are you doing? You're strengthening it. You're streamlining it. I don't know what, strengthening your board engagement, what it might be. And then digging into, okay, what are a couple steps that are going to move us forward? And then really an important next piece, which I always have groups do, is what is success actually going to look like? Brene Brown talks about painting done. What does done look like? So that really helps clarify what's our end goal? Where are we heading towards? And sometimes that's going to be metrics. Sometimes that's going to be progress. We're going to finish updating all of our policies. We're going to revise our bylaws, whatever it might be. So it might be kind of a check a thing off the to-do list, but it might also be, we're going to increase, donor engagement by X percentage. So what does it actually look like to succeed with this goal?
I got it. And you mentioned also about KPIs and keeping track of your progress. Is there a system that you recommend to put in place in nonprofits? Do you think a CRM is essential for them to execute a strategic planning? What is your opinion about it?
That's a good question. And usually I'm pretty tool agnostic, so it's whatever folks are familiar with. And so, even when I'm doing strategic planning with a group online, one of the big considerations is, what's the tech comfort level of the folks involved, right? Are they super tech savvy? And so I can use an online whiteboard that has graphics and has that visual element, or are we trying to keep it simple because, you've got volunteers, people on the board that have been out of the workforce for a long time. So we'll stick to Google Docs, and even that sometimes can be challenging. So, I think a CRM is helpful to keep track of, and CRM being customer relation management system. Also got, what is the other one? The content management, CMS, content management system. All of those tools are really helpful, but I think it's going to depend on the capacity of the organization, the maturity of the organization, how much information they're having to keep track of, and what way are they actually going to use versus buying a system that, no one is interested in learning.
Perfect. And you mentioned about maturity. I want to also support the beginning nonprofits who are starting brand new, and how they can start, and when is the right time to do a strategic planning for a brand new nonprofit.
I think a brand new nonprofit can do a strategic plan. They just won't have as much history to build on, right? They won't be improving something that already was. They'll be in that phase of we're building and setting out those beginning stages of building out our program, building out our organization. But the whole process really is designed to help any nonprofit, especially at the startup, should be involving a group of people, should be involving the community that you're trying to serve. So, involving those voices in the planning process will help set a better direction. And there's probably going to be some experiments that you build in there. You may not want to plan for as long a time horizon with a startup because you're learning as you're going, as we always are, but even more so when you're in that startup phase.
Thank you. What I really like to help nonprofit professions is also to develop the skills they need to accomplish their strategic planning. What I would recommend after doing a strategic planning is individually analyze what is your role in this strategic planning and what are the skills you need to develop to make it happen. So taking a look after individually with your team members, what are the skills they need to develop will be also helpful. Carol, love for you to share with our audience a little bit about your podcast. What type of content do you share over there? Why did you create it? And how they can benefit by listening to your podcast.
Yeah, it was a pandemic project. So I just passed my 2-year podiversary of Mission Impact. And the genesis of it actually started, I'll be embarrassed how many more years before that. I was at a conference of nonprofit consultants, at the Alliance for Nonprofit Management. And I sat in on a panel discussion. We're going through in the nonprofit sector this kind of generational shift that I feel like people have been talking about, this leadership shift that was going to happen since I started in the nonprofit sector 25 years ago. And it's finally happening in terms of baby boomers retiring, et cetera. And so there were a number of consultants who were talking about, how do I leave a legacy? How do I teach other people what I've learned? And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to do a bunch of, I was starting out or thinking about starting my consulting practice at that time. So I was doing a lot of, what they call informational interviews, right? And I thought, well, I could do those, record them, and publish them for people, and they could learn along with me. So I talked to other consultants who support nonprofits and have a range of conversations about, operations, fundraising, strategic planning, diversity, equity, inclusion, board transitions, board governance, anything and all the things that go into running a good nonprofit. And I love doing it because with every conversation, I learn something new and get to connect with amazing colleagues. So it's a lot of fun.
I agree with you. And don't worry, the description of this podcast, you'll find the link to access her podcast. And we have a special gift for all of you. Carol is offering a free resource on strategic planning. Can you share what is it, Carol? You have a download that they can access.
Yeah, so we talked about those common mistakes that organizations make in strategic planning and kind of how to avoid some of those pitfalls. And so it's a resource on that. Can't remember the exact title. I think it is Common Mistakes that Organizations Make in Strategic Planning. But it's one of about, 5 to 10 free resources that I have on my website that you can download. And with that, I'll then add you to my mailing list. And so you'll then get notified about the next Mission Impact podcast.
Perfect. I will put on the description of the podcast here your website, this link for them to download, and also your LinkedIn profile if they want to know or contact you. What is the best way for nonprofits to contact you?
So on my website, gracesocialsector.com, there's a contact form. So just reach out to me that way. Let me know how you heard about me and what you're interested in. And I'm looking to bring on some new clients at the beginning of 2023 doing strategic planning. So be excited to talk to folks.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us, Carol.
All right. Thank you so much.
listening to Wisdom for Nonprofits. To hear past and future episodes, please subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast channel. We appreciate your reviews and suggestions for future show topics. If you have a question or a suggestion, please write to us at podcast@wity.tech. More resources are available for you at our website, wity.tech. And please join us in the Wisdom for Nonprofits group on LinkedIn. Wisdom for Nonprofits is copyright 2019 by Bettina Meyer-Flug and wity.tech. All rights reserved.